Some stories just don't know when to quit. Franchises will take root with an all-time classic game, then just keep on churning out product after product, year after year, with a built-in fan base that basically sticks it out due to a combination of extreme fanboyism, Stockholm Syndrome, and a feeling of obligation to finish the story that'll never end because they've simply come this far. Other franchises end well before their due date. Either the devs lost their interest, licensing issues due to constant buyouts and hostile takeovers, an entry that didn't live up to expectations, or simply a desire to leave them wanting more. The gaming world is littered with dead franchises, taken well before their time. We'll get ready to press F to pay respects and dream of a better alternate universe where these 5 such franchises get to live again.
Well, there I am. Conquer the King.
I put this at number 5 just to get it out of the way. Every time any YouTuber makes a list like this, Conquer is on it. It's gotten pretty repetitive, yet I couldn't keep it off. There are several reasons Conquer needs to return, and not just because it was a great game. See, when Conquer originally released, it was a time of platforming animal mascots galore. You couldn't shake a stick without hitting 15 different bandicoots, hedgehogs, geckos, or dragons. Now, to the praise of Conquer, our friendly foul-mouthed squirrel managed to develop a following even amongst the popular kids' crowd. But flash forward to today and the market is very thin. You've got plumbers on Nintendo, Lombaxes on PlayStation, but Xbox is void of any such cute cartoony jumpers, and PC is stuck with the occasional indie clone. Conquer today would fill a massive gap. Not only would he give Xbox PC a resurgence of the platformer genre, but he'd bring back a genre of games I'm pretty sure only had one entry all time: the spoof. A good spoof movie is a wonderful sight to behold, and aside from Conquer, I'm not aware of a single such game in history. It's actually pretty hard to find a comedy game of any sort these days. Most franchises go for the gritty action feel rather than a lighthearted comedy. Not only did Conquer take on the whole platforming genre as a whole, it even set its sights on other pop culture phenomena like Terminator, Matrix, and Saving Private Ryan. That's something that has been missing since Conquer went to sleep, and would be a welcome return to the video game medium. One of the worst bits of news of the last decade was that Lucasfilm sold Star Wars to Disney, basically removing any chance we had at having a good Star Wars movie anytime soon. But one of the best things we've heard is that EA has lost the Star Wars license. This means we can finally start getting Star Wars games that aren't generic action games with an uninspired protagonist and, heavy air quotes, RPG elements, which basically include moves that 10 years ago would have been part of the standard moveset and collectible ponchos. Or versions of the failing Battlefield games with a Star Wars skin and enough gambling to make Vegas the only place you can legally play them on dry land. There are so many Star Wars games in the works right now that if even a quarter of them are half as good as the retro games, we might actually see a resurgence of the Star Wars property for a new generation of fans. Well, one game that hasn't been announced and desperately needs to be is the Shadows of the Empire remake. I love Star Wars, but I actually hate Jedi's, force powers, and lightsabers. I was all about the gritty side of Star Wars. Bounty hunters in beat-up patchwork armor, gunslingers with a crooked smile trying to sarcasm away the fact that every moment of their life is a fight for survival. Spaceships capable of light-speed travel that still need you to punch the dashboard to get started up. Well, if that's the kind of fan you are, then Shadows is just the game for you. Take control of Discount Han Solo and follow some kind of story, probably. But more importantly, play through the iconic moments of the only Star Wars trilogy in existence. Take down walkers in the Battle of Hoth, race speeder bikes on Tatooine, kill Boba Fett for the umpteenth time, and destroy the second Death Star. And that's the beauty of Shadows of the Empire. Not only do you get to experience a variety of landscapes and fight a variety of enemies, but you even get to enjoy a variety of gameplay styles. The core game is a third-person corridor shooter. Then suddenly it's an air-to-ground combat game. No, wait, it's actually a space-based dogfighting game. No, it's a Harley speeder racing game. All with some hover train platforming thrown in for good measure. The game hasn't aged well, and I wouldn't suggest going back to play it today. But with the advances in technology, as well as video game mechanics and storytelling, a Shadows of the Empire remake could have Game of the Year possibilities. Now is the absolute perfect time for Time Splitters to make its return. I honestly don't know or care much about the story of Time Splitters. If it has an intriguing and fun narrative guiding it, great, I'd be into that too. But more important is the multiplayer. There is a massive hole in the market for multiplayer shooters right now, especially the more casual shooters. Since 2007, with the release of Modern Warfare, the multi-shooter market has been absolutely dominated by Call of Duty. Every year there are 2 COD games in the top 10 best-selling games of the year. During that 15-year period, there have been several franchises rise up and try to take that throne, but the only one that has managed to come close, and more importantly, stick around to claim the number 2 spot has been Battlefield. But Battlefield has slipped hard and fast since peaking in 2016 with the wildly popular Battlefield 1. And COD has seen its own rough patch, so much so that they've recently announced that for the first time since at least 2007, there will be no Call of Duty game next year. The multi-shooter market is officially wide open, with the only real leader now being the free-to-play Halo Infinite. This means it's the perfect time to bring in a new contender, like Time Splitters. Why Time Splitters specifically? Well, I feel like the time travel aspect opens up a lot of opportunities that the other franchises can't compete with. Don't know if you want World War I, II, Modern, or Future? Fine, just do them all. Time Splitters gives you the opportunity to use any time period, any location, any amount of technology, and really hone your settings to the strengths and uniqueness of the gameplay. Something you can't do when you're handcuffed to a specific time and specific place like any other shooter. I personally have given up on multi-shooters. They've become nothing more than a vehicle for legalized online gambling aimed at suckering kids into buying useless digital items with their parents' credit cards. But I still love the feeling of competition and achievement I feel after a good game, and would love to see a resurgence of old-school game design that favors the experience over the money, built with a lot of passion and played with even more. I would welcome Time Splitters with open arms, if it actually held up those priorities and didn't slip into the same hole that EA and Activision pushed their franchises into a long time ago. Duke Nukem Forever might be the biggest bomb in gaming history. It's a failure of catastrophic proportions. For the few of you unaware, Duke Nukem began his journey as a serviceable but pretty silly side-scroller that was released 3 years after Nintendo's infinitely better Contra. But somehow, Duke managed to survive for a second release before finally hitting it big with Duke Nukem 3D, the game that finally made Duke a household name. Shortly after the release of Duke 3D, it was clear that they had a hit on their hands, and they began work on the follow-up, a game which would redefine the term development hell. The appropriately named Duke Nukem Forever would be under development for the next 15 years, before finally releasing as a broken, unplayable mess. If you're interested in more details, there are about 10,000 videos on YouTube detailing it in depth, but suffice to say it basically killed the Duke franchise forever. And see, this is what I hate about publishers. They'll see one failure and assume it's because people didn't want the product, not because the product was terrible. The fact is that today would be a great time for another Duke Nukem game. As I mentioned with Conker, there's a distinct lack of humor or even lighthearted tones in AAA games today. Having a game that plays like Doom 2016 or Rage 2, starring an immature, wisecracking generic action man, killing giant pig aliens or whatever, might be just what the doctor ordered. But because the last entry was so terrible, due entirely because of the failures of the devs, it's unlikely we'll ever see another entry in this one-hit wonder of a franchise, and that's a shame.
They were all dead. The final gunshot was an exclamation mark to everything that had led to this point. I released my finger from the trigger, and then it was over.
I'm absolutely shocked this hasn't happened yet. Max Payne is a true classic of gaming. If Metal Gear is Dr. No, Half-Life is Citizen Kane, and Mario 64 is Gone with the Wind, then Max Payne is the Maltese Falcon. A true masterpiece whose full vision couldn't be recognized due to hardware limitations, but still displayed enough potential to spawn 2 sequels and a movie, albeit a terrible movie. It's almost insulting that we are getting remastered games like Alan Wake and full remakes of things like Final Fantasy and Resident Evil, but they haven't given Max Payne the same treatment. As good as Payne was at the time, I can hardly imagine how much better it would be today. Max is the kind of game where the world is entirely unpopulated. Rooms have maybe 2 or 3 pieces of furniture, and literally every person who appears on screen is a bad guy, because they didn't have the processing power to truly populate the world. They try to explain this away by saying the snowstorm is keeping everyone inside, but this is New York after all. It's the place no one goes because it's too crowded. Given the advances not just in terms of technology, but also storytelling, voice acting, and motion capture, Max Payne today would be as far removed from its former self, in a very good way, as any game I could possibly think of. But on top of how much the game could benefit from it, the gaming world would too. There's a distinct lack of good detective games in the AAA market. If you want to drop down to the indie market, you could maybe talk about things like The Sinking City, but those aren't in the same league. It's been since LA Noire that games even tried to dip their toe into the noir genre, and Max Payne is just the franchise to not only bring it back, but establish it as a mainstay for gaming. Noir is perfect for video games. I think it works better than in the movies even. Inner monologue narration is a perfect way to deliver character development and story without cutting the gameplay. Leather jackets and fedoras are easier to program than hair and cloth. As I've mentioned multiple times now, games are naturally taking a darker, more depressing tone, and you can begin a franchise with a character who's too old for this spit, and keep him around for 15 plus years without worrying about the actor aging beyond the role. Max Payne desperately needs a toes-up remake, and soon.